Israel moves deeper into Gaza, but tonight there are hopes a pause in the fighting could be edging closer. As Israel's ground offensive gathers pace, ITV understands negotiations are underway to secure the release of several hostages in return for a break in the airstrikes the UN says is desperately needed.
These are the gates to a living nightmare. A nightmare where people have been suffocating under persistent bombardment.
Any negotiations will be lengthy and very complex. More than 200 hostages are still being held, hidden right across Gaza. We will bring you the latest also tonight. Stabbed to death outside a primary school, tributes to a 15-year-old kind and thoughtful boy. Signs of a deal, perhaps, between train companies and the RMT. Could the end be in sight for rail strikes? Forced out of the BBC, Carol Vorderman says she stepped down after breaching impartiality rules. And
Karamak, the golden creamy bar.
A fond farewell to a sweet treat. Nestlé calls time on Karamak.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. ITV News understands around a dozen Israeli hostages could be released in Gaza in return for a pause in fighting. A source says negotiations are still ongoing tonight, but if agreed, it could mark a significant, if perhaps temporary, break in Israel's relentless bombing of the Strip. Top diplomats from G7 countries today added their voices to those calling for urgent action to help trapped civilians. But for now, the airstrikes continue, with the Hamas-run health ministry reporting 10,500 Palestinians have been killed. Just yesterday, 15,000 fled south from the battle-torn north, according to the UN. With the latest, here's our global security editor, Rohit Katru.
The exit from northern Gaza today. People finding any way to get out, carrying rucksacks and carrier bags and anything else they could. Some were elderly. A woman pushed by a man wearing well-worn sandals. But to look down this road is to see that Gaza is a young place. Half its population is under 18.
We moved to the schools, but the schools were also not safe. We didn't have food or drinking water. There wasn't drinking water for our children. There is no life in Gaza.
At the Rafah crossing, a visit by the UN's human rights chief. He said war crimes had been committed by Hamas and by Israel, which he added was guilty of the collective punishment of the people of Gaza.
The lifeline has been unjustly, outrageously thin. These are the gates to a living nightmare.
A vigil in Jerusalem for those being held inside Gaza. It's the release of some of the hostages, which could now lead to a pause in the fighting. Tonight, a source told ITV News that negotiations are ongoing to release 10 to 15 hostages in exchange for a pause of up to 2 days. A second source said Americans would be included. And talks had been held up because the hostages are scattered across different locations and held by more than one group. 1 month and 1 day into its war, Israel appears to be moving towards fulfilling its early objectives. It released footage today of its engineers blowing up tunnels within the Strip. But more consequential than what happens here is the fighting within the city, much of which now appears to have been cut off from the south of the Gaza Strip. The United States chief diplomat is finding the diplomacy difficult. In Japan today, as Israel continues to say what it intends to do, he was left to make clear what it won't.
Israel cannot occupy Gaza. Now, the reality is that there may be a need for some transition period.
From behind the scenes tonight, we're told there is some hope that a deal for a pause in the fighting might be close to being reached. We have heard that optimism before.
And Rohit joins us now from Tel Aviv. Rohit, what more can you tell us about these negotiations involving a possible release of hostages and a pause in airstrikes?
Well, of course, Mary, this is a really complicated negotiation. It involves not only Hamas representatives, but officials from Qatar, from Egypt, from the United States, and pressure from every country which has citizens or dual citizens being held. But this process has been delayed not just by unwillingness, but by logistics, by the fact we are told that so many of these hostages are being held not by Hamas directly, but by Islamic Jihad or by other groups. We're being hearing from Hamas sources speaking to a news agency this evening saying that they are talking about a 3-day pause. What we're being told by negotiation sources is that they're looking at more than 1 or 2 days. But we've just heard from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has reiterated what he said throughout this past 4 months, that there will be no ceasefire in Gaza without the release of those hostages.
OK, Rohit Katru in Tel Aviv, thank you. Well, back here, Rishi Sunak tonight continued to describe a pro-Palestinian march planned for Armistice Day this Saturday as disrespectful. That is, despite assurances it will take place away from the cenotaph. The boss of the Metropolitan Police was called into Number 10 this afternoon. He agreed to keep the situation under constant review. And our political correspondent Carl Dinnan is in Downing Street for us now. So, Carl, it looks like, for the moment at least, this march is still on.
Yes, it does. Just over an hour ago, the Prime Minister put out a statement saying he supported the right of people to engage in peaceful process, even when he disagreed with them, as he does in this case. And that seems to mark the end of government attempts to stop this march happening, which culminated this afternoon with the head of the Metropolitan Police being called in here to Downing Street to talk to the Prime Minister about why he was letting it go ahead. This is what the Prime Minister said before that meeting.
This is a decision that the Metropolitan Police Commissioner has made, and he has said that he can ensure that he safeguards remembrance for the country this weekend, as well as keep the public safe. Now, my job is to hold him accountable for that, and we've asked the police for information on how they will ensure that this happens.
The Prime Minister still says that this march is disrespectful, but Sir Mark Rowley of the Metropolitan Police says he cannot ban it on that basis. In fact, he can't ban a static protest at all. He could impose conditions on a march if there was a serious risk of public disorder, but at the moment he doesn't think there is that. Now, it's worth saying the two events on Saturday are quite separate. The cenotaph in Whitehall, just down here, we'll see the 2-minute silence marked at 11 o'clock. This is quite separate, remember, from the Remembrance Sunday events the following day. The March for Palestine begins an hour later at midday in Hyde Park, about a mile away. It then skirts past Westminster and heads down to the US Embassy south of the Thames. The organisers of that say they are doing nothing more disrespectful than calling for a ceasefire on Armistice Day, but clearly the government is worried that extremists will try to disrupt the armistice events. The Metropolitan Police have promised they will not let that happen. So Saturday will be a big day for the most senior police officer in the country.
Carl Dinnan in Downing Street, thank you. Well, political division over the war continues to grow here, not least for the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. Last night, a shadow minister quit his role in order to strongly advocate, as he said, for a ceasefire in Gaza. And ITV News understands 17 more Labour frontbenchers are now backing the calls, a direct contradiction to Sir Keir, who wants only a humanitarian pause. Our political correspondent Shihab Khan explains.
Side by side, they stand united on their Gaza policy. But while the leader of the opposition is in agreement with the Prime Minister, he doesn't seem to have the same level of support from some within his own party. A third of his MPs have opposed his position, more than 35 councillors have resigned, and now a member of his front bench has stepped down. Imran Hussain, in his resignation letter, said, "Given the crisis unfolding, I wish to be a strong advocate for the humanitarian ceasefire advocated by the UN. It is clear that I cannot sufficiently, in all good conscience, do this from the front bench, given its current position." He had been vocal about his stance in recent weeks.
The innocent blood continues to be spilled on the streets of Gaza.
But his resignation is partly due to a toughening up of Labour's position. Mr Hussain, who represents Bradford East, was told if he signed a parliamentary motion calling for a ceasefire, he would be sacked. He stepped down and did it anyway, and the local constituents we spoke to were broadly supportive.
He needs to stick with his principles because of what we need to do. We all need to fight for to stop what's happening in the Gaza.
People are dying, so something has to be done. So it has to be a ceasefire.
Today in the Commons, despite the warning, shadow ministers, some passionately, continued to call for a ceasefire.
When will the UK ramp up its effort to end the bloodshed and ensure Palestinian children just have the right to live?
For lasting peace, we must inevitably reach the point of a ceasefire.
And frustrations from constituents are still reaching MPs' inboxes.
Every MP has had a large amount of correspondence on this. I was in the chamber earlier, a Conservative was saying that she had never seen as many emails on one subject in 13 years. So for me, they're coming in the inbox, I think, more than Brexit, more than Partygate.
But despite the emails and protests, Labour remain adamant that calling for a humanitarian pause, the position of both the government and the US, is the right strategy.
I know colleagues feel strongly about it. We all do. We see horrifying images on our television screens every day. We saw the brutality and the barbarity of the terrorist attacks on the 7th of October. We're all moved by that. We all want to see progress. We all want violence to stop. But what Keir Starmer is setting out is a credible plan around how we make sure that more aid gets in.
Labour's Gaza policy has caused significant tension within the party, and the leadership will now be hoping that more resignations don't follow.
Shihab Khan reporting there. Now, let's move on to other news. And hopes have been raised of a breakthrough in the long-running dispute on rail workers' pay. Talks between the train companies and the RMT union ended today, having set a way forward. It could mean a backdated pay rise and job security guarantees. Well, Ian Woods is at London's King's Cross station tonight. So is this it, Ian, then? Does it mean no further strikes coming down the line?
Could be. I mean, there have been more than 20 strikes since June of last year, but at least there is the prospect of what appears to be the basis of an agreement coming out of the blue this evening. Remember, the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union has been campaigning not only for a big pay rise, but for a guarantee that changes in working practices won't mean job losses. Well, the RMT and the Rail Delivery Group have come up with what they call a Memorandum of Understanding, which sets out a process to get a deal, and members of the union will get a chance to vote on those proposals. Now, if accepted, there'll be a pay rise backdated to last year, and according to the Department of Transport, there's a promise of no compulsory redundancies, but there will be local talks with individual rail companies about proposed reforms. No extra money is on offer, but the recent U-turn on closing ticket offices may have helped in negotiations. Now, the RMT boss, Mick Lidge, posted a video to his members a short time ago, which he accepted it wasn't a perfect deal.
The pay offer remains below the rate of inflation and is not what we would have wanted. But it does provide for a considerable period of time for the next 6 months where there will be no need for industrial action, as there will be no changes imposed on you.
Now, it's important to say that the union are not recommending that their members accept this deal. They're very much leaving it up to them, but it is the first time they've even put proposals to the workforce for a vote. So Mr. Lidge says it's a welcome development and tens of thousands of commuters will agree.
Ian Woods at King's Cross Station, thank you. The family of a 15-year-old boy stabbed close to a school in Leeds yesterday have described him as one in a million. Alfie Lewis's relatives say they are devastated beyond words, and police continue to hold a 14-year-old on suspicion of his murder. Our North of England reporter Kelly Foran has more.
Known by those closest to him as our Uncle Alfie. 1 in a million. The family of Alfie Lewis say they have no words to describe their devastation after the 15-year-old was killed in the middle of the afternoon. A struggle for everyone who knew him to even try to come to terms with.
He was my best mate. He'd always be the one to make you laugh when you were, upset. He was so understanding. He was absolutely beautiful. He was a beautiful soul.
Alfie would always be there to put a smile on your face. He always knew how to light up a room, always.
Just minutes before the school bell rang at the end of the day at this primary school, just before young children were due to leave, Lewis was stabbed on the street outside. Tributes continue to grow at a bench where Alfie and his friends used to gather in this quaint and quiet town on the outskirts of Leeds.
It's almost impossible to find the words. There is just a complete sense of shock, utter devastation for the family. We can't really comprehend how they must be feeling right now.
Alfie's former schools say a tragedy like this is a huge shock to our school and local community, and we understand that people will be deeply affected by this rare incident. However, they say we know the community will rally together to support each other during this very sad and difficult time. A 14-year-old boy is still being questioned by officers on suspicion of murder. A 16-year-old arrested on suspicion of murder was released without charge. In the last hour, friends and family have started to gather to spend their Wednesday evening together and doing something they never could have imagined. Paying their respects to Alfie. And we can still hear fireworks in that park not far from here where hundreds of people are still gathered. The police are still appealing for witnesses, for anyone who saw what happened here outside this primary school to come forward. They're also urging people not to speculate about it on social media. Meanwhile, tonight, Alfie's family have said that their lives will never be the same.
Kelly Foran in Leeds, thank you. Well, there is plenty more still to come. The ITV Evening News, including...
It does seem that there's almost a reflex response of, let's try and hush this up.
The doctor who warned hospital bosses about killer nurse Lucy Letby's behaviour says some medics still feel too scared to whistle-blow. And how Matt Hancock has come under fire again at the COVID inquiry. We will have more on both those stories and the rest of the news after the break. Hello again, welcome back. Now, the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has come in for yet more criticism at the COVID inquiry. Lord Sedwill, who was the country's most senior civil servant, admitted that he'd wanted him sacked. But Lord Sedwill also apologised for his own heartless suggestion of chickenpox-style COVID parties. Our political correspondent Romilly Weeks is following the hearings.
Stay at home to protect the NHS and to save lives.
He was the man who told us this repeatedly during the pandemic. Now, the UK's most senior civil servant at the time has told the inquiry he advised the Prime Minister Matt Hancock should be replaced as Health Secretary.
How damaging, how destructive this loss of confidence in Mr Hancock was.
Clearly damaging. I did raise really three questions with the Prime Minister throughout those months. One was about Mr Hancock's candour.
Lord Sedwill said he had to get others to check what Mr Hancock promised and finally concluded this.
You told the Prime Minister to sack Mr Hancock?
I don't think I used that word with him, but I did use it in a WhatsApp with Simon Case.
And you described it thus, to save lives and protect the NHS?
That was gallows humour.
Few are laughing at the picture of extreme chaos surrounding the Prime Minister and his closest advisor Dominic Cummings, as described to the inquiry. In a WhatsApp exchange shown today, Simon Case, another senior civil servant, writes, "It's like taming wild animals. Nothing in my past experience has prepared me for this madness. The PM and the people he chooses to surround himself with are basically feral." Mark Sedwill replies, "I have the bite marks." Lord Sedwill, who was eventually replaced himself by the Prime Minister, didn't escape criticism today, admitting he had indeed suggested in early March 2020 that people could be encouraged to catch COVID in chickenpox-style parties.
I do understand the distress that must have caused, and I apologise for that.
Mr Hancock has become a lightning rod for criticism at this inquiry. Dominic Cummings has already argued he thought he should have been sacked. And now we have the two most senior civil servants at the time agree that what the Health Secretary said could not always be trusted. There are a lot of people at the inquiry trying to protect their reputations. Mr Hancock is going to have a lot of defending to do. The Prime Minister has stated he didn't have any concerns about Mr Hancock's performance. Both men will have the chance to try to account for their pandemic actions in the coming weeks. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
West Midlands Police has opened a murder investigation after a teenager was fatally shot. The 16-year-old boy died in hospital yesterday, and detectives in the Ladywood area of Birmingham are continuing their inquiries. Our reporter Layla Hayes is there. Layla, this investigation still very much in the early stages.
Yes, that's right, and a lot of shock here, as you can imagine. Emergency services were called here at around 12:30 on Sunday afternoon after reports that a boy had been shot. What they found was the 16-year-old with serious injuries, and he was rushed to hospital. But today they sadly confirmed that he passed away yesterday, and a murder investigation has now been launched. Well, a police tent and cordon remains here, and throughout the day we have seen forensic officers carrying out searches of the canal path here. A 17-year-old boy was arrested yesterday. He remains in police custody being questioned. Police say they have increased patrols in this area. They say that they understand that a shooting here would increase concern within the community, but they are asking people to remain calm so they can carry out their investigation and convict whoever did this. Well, the 16-year-old boy hasn't been named, but police say they are doing everything they can tonight to support his family.
Layla Hayes in Birmingham. Thank you. The NHS in England is being forced to cut the number of operations it will carry out this year. ITV News understands targets to bring down waiting lists have been watered down so hospitals can hit their budgets. The cost of the doctor strikes also means that new equipment, including cancer scanners, will not be bought. Our health correspondent Martin Stew is here. There are going to be a lot of hearts sinking around the country with this. What more can you tell us?
Well, we know that the strikes cost around £1 billion. That's the government's own calculation. So NHS England went to the Treasury to say, please, can we have £1 billion of additional funding? I understand the Treasury have only offered 100 million of funding, so that's just a tenth. So what happens? Well, the upshot is they've got to make that out of existing budgets. About 500 million will come from capital expenditure, new kit they'd have bought, which includes things like cancer scanners. The other money is going to come from cutting services, and that is why NHS England have now reduced their target for elective. That's pre-planned things like surgeries and surgeries and appointments from 107%. It went down to 105% in April, now down to 103%. What does that mean? Well, difficult to put an exact number on it, but if you look at it, there are 13.5 million pre-planned appointments and surgeries. Doing a bit of rough maths, 2% of that is 270,000 appointments and things being knocked down every single time. This matters hugely because there are 7.75 million people on the waiting lists, a record. Really frustrating for them, and it's important politically too, because cutting those waiting lists is one of Rishi Sunak's biggest 5 pledges. And at the moment, it's looking increasingly hard he's going to achieve that.
Martin Stew, thank you. Pre-tax profits at Marks & Spencer soared by more than 50% during the first half of this year. A big rise in food sales helped drive revenue, and it is the latest sign of changing fortunes at the high street chain following a major turnaround plan. Well, business editor Joel Hills is there for us. It's been a difficult few years, hasn't it, for M&S? But this sounds like pretty good news for the company.
Yeah, well, Marks & Spencer Merry is definitely having a very good cost of living crisis. High inflation, rising interest rates have left so many people in the United Kingdom feeling worse off. But the company today reported very strong sales between April and September and said it's quietly confident it's going to have a pretty good Christmas. But I think the key thing here is that the company's reinstated the dividend for the first time since COVID arrived in the UK in 2020. The company will be giving a cash bonus to its shareholders. The share price leapt 8% today. Marks & Spencer shares are worth 90% more today than they were back in January. That makes the company one of the best performing on the London Stock Exchange. On the FTSE 100, only Rolls-Royce has done better. But Marks & Spencer, as you say, has been in perpetual turnaround for years. Ever since I have been reporting on businesses for the best part of 20 years, chief executives have been trying to come up with plans to revive its fortunes. We've got a situation where back in 2018, the current chairman was saying Marks & Spencer was on a burning platform. Since then, stores have been shut if they've been underperforming. 9,000 staff have left the business and they've had to retreat from France. Difficult decisions, but the platform is no longer burning. Marks & Spencer's has survived and some would argue it's thriving.
Rare good news there. Joel Hills in central London, thank you. You are watching the ITV Evening News. It's nearly 7 o'clock and here's what's still ahead before Emmerdale. Prince William in the jungle vowing to actually bring change to causes he supports. Carol Vorderman is forced out of the BBC over new social media guidelines.
Caramac, the golden creamy bar.
Is this goodbye to the classic Caramac bar?
And last month was officially the world's hottest October on record, almost guaranteeing that 2023 as a year will be a record breaker. Join me for more details on this in the national forecast later in the programme.
But before all that, alarming claims that some medics feel ignored or even silenced when they try to raise serious concerns about patient care. A survey carried out for the Tonight programme by the Hospital Doctors Union, HCSA, found more than 70% of them think it would damage their careers to speak up about patient safety. Of those who have, 93% weren't satisfied with their manager's response. And 64% said raising concerns badly affected them at work, like being overlooked for a promotion. Our UK editor Paul Brand and a top consultant who helped report the killer nurse, Lucy Letby, met other medics who feel their concerns have been overlooked.
Hello, Lucy, is it?
Yes.
Hello, my name's Chester, please. Look, it's Stefan, 2 seconds.
Justice has been served, and a nurse who should have been caring for our babies has been found guilty of harming them.
I sentence you to imprisonment for life.
We are committed to ensuring that lessons continue to be learned.
If only everyone had the chance to learn lessons in the wake of Lucy Letby, 7 of her victims will never even start school. Now the doctor who warned managers about the killer wants to know why so many scandals stem from other NHS staff being ignored.
Having heard from dozens of other people across the NHS who've spontaneously contacted us since the outcome of the trial, who shared their experiences of raising concerns and how they've been treated, it does seem that there's almost a reflex response of, let's try and hush this up, which I cannot get my head around.
To try and understand, we travelled with Dr Jayaram to examine whistleblowing cases from mid-staffs to here in Morecambe, where, unlike Ravi, raising concerns cost Dr Peter Duffy his job.
Nobody, when you acquire this label of being a whistleblower, nobody wants anything to do with you.
When Peter Reid lost his life at Royal Lancaster Infirmary, whistleblowing destroyed Dr Duffy's. He reported that the kidney patient had waited days for an emergency operation that should have been done within hours.
So you'd literally been Doctor of the Year, you blow the whistle, and lo and behold, you're now the most unwanted doctor in the department.
It was the most terrible few months of my life. My pay was cut at the end of that month, and we then embarked on a series of punishments and detriments and threats of disciplinary action. So at that point, I did the obvious thing and resigned.
The case was kept quiet until Dr. Duffy went to the local paper. And Karen finally found out what had happened to her dad.
Whistleblower surgeon whose NHS dream career now lies in tatters. It was a gut instinct that he was talking about our father. And I was right. Watching Dad have his life support machine turned off was such a hard thing to watch. We owed it to Dad to find out the truth.
Morecambe Bay NHS Trust admitted to us that things hadn't been good enough. Recent inspections have found they have now improved. Dr. Duffy didn't just win his case against them, but also an MBE for his services during the pandemic. Since COVID-19, pressures on the NHS have only increased, not just on services, but on staff. This chief executive in Suffolk and Essex fears unacceptable care is becoming the acceptable.
2 years ago, if a patient waited an hour in an ambulance outside an A&E department, that would be a serious incident. Now it happens every day in a lot of hospitals up and down the country. And my concern is, because it's almost become business as usual, we've become almost a bit anaesthetised to it. We've lowered the bar, lowered the bar, lowered the bar.
The NHS does have schemes to encourage whistleblowing, and the coming inquiry will learn lessons from Lucy Letby. But when to speak up and when you'll be heard remains a risk. One Dr. Jayaram says staff must run.
So I saw a little boy recently who's coming up to 7, and at the end of the consultation his mother gave me a thank you card, and she said, "My twins were born prematurely on the 10th of July 2016. And if you and your colleagues hadn't fought, they would have been on the neonatal unit and she could have been the nurse looking after them." I would say to anyone in the NHS who's got concerns about patient safety, just don't give up.
And there is more from Paul and Dr. Jayaram in this week's episode of the Tonight programme. That is After Lucy Letby, Silence on the Ward. And it is tomorrow evening at 8:30 on ITV1 and at 10:45 on STV. Now, let's get an update on what's making the news tonight. As the ground offensive continues in Gaza, ITV News understands negotiations are continuing this evening to agree the release of around a dozen Israeli hostages in return for a pause in fighting. And the head of the Met Police has greenlit the planned pro-Palestinian demonstration this weekend with assurances it will not take place near the cenotaph. An ITV News team has for the first time seen for themselves the dust, debris and total devastation of the war in Gaza. Our team was escorted into the town of Bet Hanun in the north of the Gaza Strip by Israeli forces who supervised what we were allowed to film or indeed to show. Their only stipulation, having seen our report, was that we protected the identity of the junior soldiers we showed. Our journalists found little trace of human life left above ground, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians having moved south of the Strip in recent weeks. But we did see evidence of a complex network of underground tunnels, with IDF troops telling us that Hamas are fighting like rats. This first-hand report comes from our senior international correspondent, John Irvine.
It takes about half an hour to drive from the orchards of southern Israel, first by jeep, then armoured personnel carrier, to a completely different landscape. The ruins of the Gaza Strip. We'd arrived in Bet Hanun, the northernmost town in the war zone, or at least what's left of it. These men were among the first Israeli soldiers to enter Gaza when the order finally came to cross the border 12 days ago. Their job now is to have and to hold an urban area where virtually no buildings remain intact and where combat is still taking place. Around the clock.
We're only about a kilometre from the Israeli border, and as you can hear, there's still quite a lot of fighting going on. These soldiers say they have yet to encounter any civilians. Presumably they left this neighbourhood because of the aerial bombardment.
The level of destruction was of a magnitude that reminded me of Mosul and Raqqa. And as was the case in both those cities, the enemy here can be around any corner. Some of the tanks we saw were protecting bulldozers brought in to try to clear away debris and create safe pathways through the demolished streets. Where it's too narrow for the machinery, clambering through broken buildings is the norm. The perils of urban warfare are all too obvious here. The men know that some of their colleagues are in the few high buildings still standing, providing covering fire. During our stay, the sound of battle was constant. This is the reality of a slow-moving ground war that's made even slower by what lies below.
We've got a pretty big IDF security detail with us because they're worried about tunnels. They say they've found miles of tunnels and bunkers under this town, and Hamas gunmen keep appearing from these tunnels and opening fire.
This is one of the many tunnels they have discovered.
This is the way they act. They stay inside the tunnel for many days and waiting, and after that they go out and making the attack.
The commanding officer described the so-called metro beneath Bet Hanun as a city under a city.
We saw it, we feel it. They are fighting like that, like rats.
Most of Israel's wars were over in days, but these soldiers say they don't care how long this one takes. All of them know someone who was killed, kidnapped or wounded in the surprise Hamas attack that this Israeli offensive is meant to ensure never happens again. John Irvine, ITV News, in Gaza.
And you can hear more from John on News at 10 a little bit later tonight. In the meantime, moving on, and Prince William says he wants to go a step further in bringing about change on major causes. He suggested he plans to delve deeper into key issues, just as his father did before he became king. The Prince was speaking at the end of a visit to Singapore for his Earthshot Awards, and today began with a treetop walk through a nature reserve famous for its monkeys. Our royal editor, Chris Shipp, reports.
To the casual observer, it might look like an audition for I'm a Celebrity, but Prince William will not be entering the TV jungle next weekend. This jungle is in Singapore. It's his final day here, where William has put his Earthshot Prize Awards front and centre and put down a bold marker of the kind of Prince of Wales he intends to be after a year in the job. Speaking today after the third of his annual Earthshot Awards last night, William did not hold back on his ambitious plans for the scheme, which runs until the end of the decade.
For 2030, bearing in mind it is only 7 years away, we'll be able to look the next generation in the eye. We'll start to see policy shifts. We'll start to see governments being incredibly engaged and a green sector starting to appear.
Prince William might have said today that he expects governments to be incredibly engaged on the climate crisis, but it won't have escaped anyone's attention that the UK government recently did the exact opposite when it watered down its green targets. So it begs this question: does this new Prince of Wales intend to be as interventionist as his father was, even when that became controversial? In the UK, we've got a king and now Prince William, who are committed to speeding up our response to climate change, and yet we've got a government who's slowing it all down.
Yes, you can imagine who I think is right, who is right on the right side of history.
As Prince of Wales, William has set out bold ambitions elsewhere. At his recent homelessness launch, William said he didn't just want to tackle it, but in his words, to eradicate the problem. That contrasts with the Home Secretary, who this week used the words lifestyle choice when referring to those sleeping on the streets in tents. It suggests, like his father, who is now much more constrained as king, William is prepared to speak out as the heir to the throne. I want to go a step further, Prince William said here in Singapore, and actually bring change. William's office called it having an impact. Some elected politicians in Westminster might disagree. Chris Ship, ITV News, Singapore.
Here, Carol Vorderman says she has been sacked from her BBC radio show after breaching social media rules. The presenter is outspoken in her online criticism of the government when our bosses at Radio Wales have decided those posts do fall foul of new guidelines and they have told her to leave. Our entertainment reporter Rishi Davda is here. This row has been brewing generally for a while, hasn't it? Did it all start with Gary Lineker?
Yes, there have been some pretty significant changes to the BBC social media guidelines, and it all goes back to March when Gary Lineker posted a comment comparing the UK's asylum policy to 1930s Germany. Stricter impartiality rules were imposed, and within those guidelines it said all BBC staff and freelancers are required to respect civility in public discourse and to not bring the BBC into disrepute. Well, Carol Vorderman is now leaving her weekly show on BBC Radio Wales. In a post, she said her decision to continually criticise the UK government means she has breached the new guidelines, adding BBC Wales management have now decided she must leave. On X, which was Twitter, the former Countdown presenter regularly challenges the Conservative Party and the actions of the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary. She goes on to say in her statement, "I'm not prepared to lose my voice on social media."
OK, Rishi Davda, thank you. Well, there is more still to come before Emmerdale tonight, including is the classic Caramac being cancelled, and
it's certainly been a damp and drizzly day here at Hever Castle in Kent, but thank goodness for a splash of autumn colour. But how much rain lies ahead? Join me for all those details in the forecast next.
Oh, do join me and Alex for that after the break. See you then. Hello again, welcome back. Time for the weather now. And after an exceptionally warm October, November is getting well underway. Trees are at their vibrant autumnal best. And Alex is at Hever Castle in Kent, where even today's grey skies couldn't dampen the colour. Alex.
Good evening, Merritt. Well, I tell you what, they did give it a good try. As I mentioned on last night's programme, we had this band of rain that was due to come through, and that arrived bang on time overnight last night, and most of us have seen some of that rain and also the grey skies overhead. Certainly quite a different feel out there today, but when we arrived here at Hever Castle in Kent a little earlier, it was still raining for a good part of the afternoon. In fact, it's only just cleared away, and of course it did make the leaves a little bit drab here and there, but as I say, it didn't spoil the autumn colour too much. And actually you can just see behind me, actually the castle is covered in ivy, and during the summer that's a pretty deep green, but at the moment it's red, and in the next month or so those leaves will completely fall away, but all the same still looking pretty beautiful. But one thing you probably would have noticed today is that it's not been particularly cold, and that comes off the back of a record-breaking October. Yes, as you may have heard, October globally has been the hottest ever recorded. In fact, we had an average global air surface temperature of 15.3 degrees Celsius. That's 1.7 degrees warmer than what you'd expect for pre-industrial times. And that comes off the back of a record-breaking September, August and July. So it looks like 2023 as a year is going to be the hottest year ever recorded. The Met Office say that it would take a record-breaking cold November and December if that were to change, but it doesn't look like it will be changing anytime soon, with the temperature still being around average at the moment. Let's take a look at the forecast though for the next few days right now.
Not everywhere will be cold today. Some places will be warm and toasty. Heinz Beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
Well, as we head through the rest of this week, it still is going to remain largely unsettled with further outbreaks of rain and showers to come through as we head through, particularly tomorrow. In fact, let's get a quick check on our pressure pattern setup, and you can see the low pressure which has been around today. That's now kind of mostly out of the way, but as we head through Thursday into Friday, we see more areas of low pressure moving in, more weather fronts, so cloudier skies at times, but also some sunny spells where we do get those breaks developing. As for this evening, well, at the moment we are in between systems, so it's dry here in Kent at the moment. We've got some clear skies overhead, but it's not going to be long as we run the sequence. As you can see, we get to see those showers moving in from the west, and those showers at times are going to be quite well organised, perhaps merging into longer spells of rain. Fairly chilly temperatures tonight in towns and cities, maybe falling down to say 5 or 6 degrees Celsius. So certainly a fresh start to the day tomorrow. Very changeable conditions as we head through Thursday. Expect showers. As I say, some of them could be on the heavy side, but in between there will be some autumn sunshine pushing through from time to time. Temperatures in the south sitting around maybe 12, 13 degrees Celsius, a bit colder as we head further north. Similar picture as we head into Friday, but as we start the weekend, there is going to be a ridge of high pressure in control. That's going to settle things down. So certainly a decent start to the weekend with more welcome sunshine on the way.
Heinz Beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
That's the way it is looking here at Hever Castle this evening. As I say, in between a dry spell at the moment, but certainly more showers to come as we head through the next few days.
OK, Alex in Kent, thank you. And finally, to the sweet treat, which its makers have announced is biting the dust. For more than 60 years, Caramac proved a popular alternative to chocolate because it doesn't actually contain any cocoa. But falling sales and a range of recent rivals mean Nestlé is now ending production. Sarah McKinley now on the caramel snack that raised the bar.
Yes. A golden oldie.
Caramac, the golden creamy bar.
64 years old is almost retirement age. Now Nestlé will say goodbye to this old caramel flavoured friend.
Caramac?
Yes.
I'm not bothered, I never liked it.
They're always changing things out there, and I wish they wouldn't. I wish they'd keep things as they were.
I've never had it, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
I haven't heard of it either.
I do know what that is.
Does this hurt you?
Yes, definitely.
Will you rush out and buy some more now before it's too late?
No, I'm on Slim World diet, so no.
Yes, how do you feel?
It does bring back memories when you were little, yeah.
People on the street might not be that bothered, but online, fans are gutted. Hundreds of them took to the platform X using the hashtag #SaveTheCaramac. They described it as an absolute travesty, a scandal, and as deeply concerning news. Now, Nestlé says they're going to refocus their efforts on the top performing brands and on new innovations. But it's clear that plenty of people don't want new innovations, they want what they already loved. For businesses who rely on this product to make their products, the news leaves a bad taste.
We sell a lot of Caramac eclairs. It's one of our top sellers, and it's going to be really upsetting for people to see it go. Word for one of our suppliers, probably about 2 months ago, they came to us and said, look, there's been a rumour that Caramac is gone. It's going to be discontinued. Last week, we finally got word that it was official, and we made the announcement on Facebook, not realising that it wasn't common knowledge at that point.
Caramac joins other classics in the confectionery cemetery.
Mars Delight and Dream Bar, very nice offerings, but trying to break into that Countline branded sector, I think it's very, very difficult.
In central London, newsagent Mr Kipps sold 5 bars of gold after the news broke this lunchtime. The remaining few now a precious commodity indeed. Sarah McKinley, ITV News.
An expert on confectionery, that's a job for me, I reckon. That's it from us. Tom's here with tonight's news at 10, but from all the evening team, bye-bye.